The clatter of a sterling silver fork against bone china was the only sound that dared to be loud in the hushed cathedral of the Gilded Compass. Elara Hayes, age 22, flinched as if the sound were a gunshot. For the past 18 months, her entire existence had been a study in silence and invisibility. She was a ghost in a crisp black uniform, a fleeting presence whose only purpose was to fill water, glasses, clear plates, and vanish before a thought could be formed about her. Tonight the air was thicker than usual, charged with the electric hum of money and power. Table 7, the coveted corner booth with its panoramic view of the Boston skyline, was occupied by the one man who could make the restaurant's owner break into a cold sweat. Julian Croft. He was a specter of a different sort, a tech billionaire who rarely emerged from his digital fortress. He was younger than the legend suggested, perhaps in his late 30s, with an ascetic's sharp features and an eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic. They missed nothing, Elara knew. She'd felt them scan past her a dozen times, dismissing her as part of the decor. Beside him sat a woman of serene elegance, his mother, Eleanor Croft. Her silver hair was swept into a graceful chignon, and her smile, though infrequent, was like a sudden burst of sunlight. She was, as the entire staff had been briefed, profoundly deaf. The third person at the table was the reason Elara's heart was trying to hammer its way through her ribcage. Richard Vance, her ex-husband, the architect of her ruin. He looked nauseatingly at ease in this world of quiet luxury, his bespoke suit a perfect armor, his smile a polished weapon. He was pitching, Elara could tell. His hands gestured with practiced enthusiasm, his voice a low, confident murmur aimed exclusively at Julian. He hadn't noticed her yet. To him, a waitress was less than a person. She was a function, an object. That was her only protection. Table 7 needs their appetizers cleared, Brenda, the head waitress, hissed as she swept past. Brenda was a woman carved from New England granite, tough and weathered, but with a surprising core of fairness. And for God's sake, try not to look like a frightened rabbit. You're scaring the Dover soul. Elara nodded, her throat too tight for words. She loaded her tray, the familiar weight a small comfort. Just another table, she told herself. He can't hurt you here. You are nothing to him. As she approached, Richard's voice became clearer. And the core of the Sentinel software is its predictive capability. It's not just reactive, it's practically precognitive. My own design, from the ground up. Elara's hands tightened on the tray. His design. The word was a lit match dropped into a pool of gasoline. Sentinel. He was still calling it that. The name she had lovingly chosen for the code she had spent 2 years of her life writing. The code he had stolen, patented under his name, and used to build an empire while she was left with nothing but ashes and restraining orders. She moved to Eleanor's side of the table first, keeping her face averted from Richard. The older woman gave her a small, polite smile. Elara returned it, her own feeling like a fragile mask. As she reached for the empty plate, Eleanor caught her eye and made a few subtle movements with her hands. It was a simple, polite question in American Sign Language. Is the chef new? The seasoning is different tonight. Without a single conscious thought, instinct took over. The 18 months of forced invisibility dissolved. Elara paused, set her tray on a nearby stand, and met Eleanor's gaze directly. Her hands, which had been trembling moments before, moved with a fluid, forgotten grace. No, same chef, she signed. But he's experimenting with smoked paprika. Do you like it? The transformation in Eleanor Croft's face was instantaneous and profound. Her polite smile blossomed into one of genuine, radiant delight. Her eyes widened and her hands flew up, answering with an animated flurry. Smoked paprika. How wonderful. It reminds me of a trip to Spain. Oh, it's so lovely to be able to ask. Most people just nod and assume I'm complaining. A bubble of warmth spread through Elara's chest, a feeling so foreign she barely recognized it. Connection. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the monster sitting 3 feet away. She was just a woman having a conversation. He would be so pleased to hear that. Elara signed back, a real smile touching her lips for the first time all night. He worries that his regular patrons will resist change. What in the hell is going on? Richard's voice sliced through the moment, cold and sharp. Ilara froze, her hand still in midair. The blood drained from her face. She turned her head slowly, her carefully constructed world shattering around her. He was staring at her, but he wasn't looking at a waitress. He was looking at her. The recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a flicker of disbelief, and then a wave of pure, venomous fury. Julian Croft, however, was looking at something else entirely. His penetrating gaze wasn't on Richard, or even on Ilara's face. It was fixed on her hands, an expression of intense, unreadable concentration on his face. The restaurant, which had been a low hum of conversation, seemed to have fallen utterly silent. Every eye was on the waitress who had just broken the cardinal rule. She had become visible. Ilara! Richard's voice was a low growl, each syllable dripping with menace. He said her name as if it were a curse, a secret he was furious to have revealed. What are you doing here? What is this pathetic little stunt? Ilara felt the air leave her lungs. The room began to swim, the crystal chandeliers blurring into streaks of light. Brenda was hovering in the background, her face a mask of horror. This was it. The end of the fragile peace she had clawed for herself. I work here, she managed to whisper, her voice raspy. She was communicating with my mother, Julian Croft said. His voice was calm, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. He finally lifted his gaze from her hands to her face. You know sign language. It wasn't a question. Before Ilara could answer, Richard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Sign language? Oh, that's rich. She picks up these little hobbies. A little knitting, a little sign language. She's full of useless talents. He waved a dismissive hand, trying to reclaim control of the situation, to shrink her back into the box of insignificance he had built for her. Now, as I was saying about the software's architecture, my mother asked her a question, Julian interrupted, his tone unwavering, and she answered it. You were so engrossed in your sales pitch, you didn't even notice your potential host trying to communicate. The rebuke was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Richard's face flushed a dull, angry red. Eleanor, who had been watching the exchange with keen, intelligent eyes, touched her son's arm. She signed to him, her movements sharp and precise. This young woman has more grace in her little finger than he has in his entire body. Ask her what happened to her. Julian watched his mother's hands, his expression softening for a fraction of a second, before hardening again as he turned back to Ilara. My mother finds you graceful. She also seems to think you have a story. I'm beginning to agree. He looked from Ilara's pale, terrified face to Richard's barely concealed rage. You two know each other. Again, not a question. We were married, Richard spat, deciding to weaponize the truth. A youthful mistake. She had issues, delusions. It didn't end well. I had hoped she'd gotten the help she needed. The lie was so audacious, so close to the twisted version of reality he had created, that Ilara felt a wave of nausea. He was painting her as unstable, pathetic, a charity case right here, in front of the man whose respect he craved. Sir, I should get back to work, Ilara stammered, turning to flee. She needed to run, to disappear, to find a hole and pull it in after her. Stay, Julian commanded. The single word held more authority than all of Richard's blustering. Ilara froze, her back still to the table. You haven't answered my question. Where did you learn to sign so fluently? The question hung in the air. The truth felt like a dangerous weapon she didn't know how to wield. But the lie Richard had just told, the casual, cruel dismissal of her sanity, sparked something deep inside her. A tiny, flickering ember of defiance she thought had long been extinguished. She turned around slowly, lifting her chin. She looked past Richard, past Julian, and directly at Eleanor Croft. I learned from my little sister Maya, she signed, her hands trembling but steady. She was born deaf. She was my whole world. Then she spoke the words aloud, her voice clearer now, stronger. I learned from my sister. Eleanor's expression clouded with sympathy, her hands forming a sign of understanding and sorrow. But it was Julian's reaction that stunned Ilara. The cool, analytical mask dropped from his face, replaced by a flicker of raw, unguarded emotion. It was there and gone in a second, but she saw it. "What happened to your sister?" he asked, his voice softer now. Before she could answer, Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the marble floor. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this soap opera. We're here to discuss business, Julian. A multi-million-dollar investment, not the sob story of a disgruntled waitress." "Sit down, Richard," Julian said, his voice dropping back to its icy calm. He didn't raise it, but the command was absolute. Richard hesitated, his jaw tight, before sinking slowly back into his seat, his face a thundercloud of fury. Julian turned his full attention back to Alara. "I asked you a question, Miss Hayes," she said quietly. "My name is Alara Hayes." She had taken back her maiden name the day the divorce was finalized, a small act of reclamation. "Alara Hayes," Julian repeated, testing the name. "You were telling me about your sister." Alara swallowed, the memory a raw, aching wound. "She passed away when I was 16. A complication from the flu. After she was gone, signing felt like the only way I could still talk to her." The confession hung in the silence of the restaurant. It was more than she had told anyone in years. It was a piece of her soul, laid bare on the cold marble floor of the Gilded Compass. Eleanor Croft reached out and gently touched Alara's arm, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She signed a single word: courage. Richard snorted, unable to help himself. "Oh, please. She's always been dramatic, using her dead sister for sympathy. It's her go-to move." That was it. The final, brutal straw. The ember of defiance inside Alara roared into a flame. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a white-hot rage. He had taken her work, her reputation, her money, her home. He would not take this. He would not defile the memory of Maya. She took a step closer to the table, her eyes locked on Richard. "You have no right to speak her name," she said, her voice low and shaking with fury. "You who complained every time I drove home to visit her grave. You who told me to get over it and stop wasting my time on a dead girl." "That's a lie," Richard blustered, his face turning blotchy. "She's hysterical. Julian, you can see she's not well." "And you," Alara continued, her voice gaining strength as she pointed a trembling finger at him. "Who told me the software I was building in Maya's memory, the one I called Sentinel, because she always said she was my guardian angel, was a foolish pipe dream? The same software you're now calling your own design from the ground up." The color drained from Richard's face. He looked from Alara's accusing face to Julian's impassive one. The trap had been sprung, not by a brilliant billionaire, but by a grieving sister who had finally been pushed too far. Julian Croft leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes narrowed into chips of ice. He looked at Richard, truly looked at him, and for the first time Richard seemed to see the predator behind the placid facade. "Sentinel," Julian said softly, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. "That's a very interesting name. Tell me, Richard." "My team has been doing its due diligence. We found the original incorporation papers for your company. For the first 2 years, your partner was listed as an E. Hayes. The name was removed in a rather messy amendment 18 months ago, around the same time you filed for divorce. Any idea who that might be?" The silence that followed was absolute. Richard Vance sat frozen, exposed, and utterly defeated, not by a rival in a boardroom, but by a ghost in a waitress uniform who had just reclaimed her voice. And Alara Hayes, standing tall in the wreckage of her past, felt the terrifying, exhilarating sensation of being seen for the very first time. The aftermath was a blur of controlled chaos. The restaurant manager, a man who normally resembled a nervous poodle, appeared at Julian's side with the swiftness of a Secret Service agent. Whispers rippled through the dining room as patrons tried to pretend they weren't watching the most riveting drama they'd seen all year. Richard, sputtering and pale, tried to salvage the situation. "This is a misunderstanding, a private marital dispute. She's emotionally unstable, prone to fabrications." Julian didn't even look at him. He simply made a small, sharp gesture to his own security detail. Two men in impeccably tailored suits who had been dining discreetly at a nearby table. They rose in unison. "Mr. Vance," Julian said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion, "our business is concluded. I suggest you leave. My security will escort you out." Humiliation, stark and absolute, washed over Richard's face. He shot Alara a look of pure hatred, a silent promise of retribution that made her blood run cold. But as the two large men flanked him and guided him firmly toward the exit, his power seemed to evaporate. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was just a man being thrown out of a fancy restaurant. When he was gone, an unnerving quiet settled over the table. Alara stood rooted to the spot, her body trembling with the adrenaline crash. The rage had receded, leaving behind a deep, rattling fear. What had she done? Brenda materialized at her elbow. "Go to the staff room, Alara. Now! I'll handle this." Her voice was stern, but her eyes held a flicker of something that looked like respect. Alara nodded numbly and turned to go, but Julian's voice stopped her again. "Miss Hayes, please wait." She hesitated, her gaze flickering to Eleanor, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Alara turned back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to keep them from shaking. Julian stood up and walked around the table to stand before her. He was taller than she'd realized, and his presence was overwhelming. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "I owe you an apology," he said, and the sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "I allowed a man like that into my mother's presence. I should have seen him for what he was." "You couldn't have known," she whispered. "It's my business to know," he countered, a hint of self-reproach in his tone. Due diligence is more than just checking financials. It's about character. I was so focused on the product, I failed to properly vet the man. "Your husband," "ex-husband," she corrected, the word tasting of freedom on her tongue. "Your ex-husband," Julian amended, a faint hint of a smile touching his lips. "He nearly made a fool out of me. For that, and for what he put you through tonight, I am truly sorry." He paused, his stormy eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" The simple question, the genuine concern, was more undoing than the confrontation itself. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed pricked at her eyes. She nodded mutely, afraid that if she opened her mouth, a sob would escape. Eleanor rose and came to her side. She gently took Alara's hand, her touch warm and surprisingly strong. She looked from Alara to her son, then signed with firm, decisive movements. "We are not leaving her here. Bring her home." Julian read his mother's hands and a complex expression crossed his face. It was a mix of surprise, calculation, and something else. Something protective. "My mother is a formidable woman," he said to Alara, "and she rarely makes suggestions. They are, for all intents and purposes, commands. She would like you to come with us." Alara's head snapped up. "What? No, I can't. I have my job. My apartment." "Your job," Julian said, his gaze sweeping the now buzzing restaurant, "is likely compromised. Even with a manager as capable as Brenda, an incident like this creates complications. And your safety, after the look Vance gave you on his way out, I'm not convinced your apartment is the most secure place for you to be tonight." His logic was cold and inescapable. Richard was vindictive. He would not take this public humiliation lying down. Her small apartment in Dorchester, with its flimsy lock, suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. I don't know. It would be for your own peace of mind as well as ours," Julian said, his tone softening. "We have more than enough room. No one will bother you. It will give us a chance to talk, properly, away from all this." He gestured vaguely at the opulent room. Alara looked at Eleanor's kind, insistent face, then at Julian's serious one. He wasn't a knight in shining armor. His eyes were too sharp, too analytical for that. He was a man who assessed risks and mitigated them. Right now he had assessed her as a risk, both to herself and perhaps to the integrity of the deal he had just torpedoed. His offer wasn't entirely altruistic, and that, strangely, made it easier to accept. It wasn't charity, it was a strategic move. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For tonight." An hour later, Alara found herself in a place that felt more like a museum than a home. Julian Croft's penthouse was a sprawling expanse of glass, steel, and minimalist art overlooking the Charles River. It was beautiful and sterile, the air humming with the same quiet efficiency as his office probably did. Eleanor had shown her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, a hushed space of cream and beige with a bathroom clad in floor-to-ceiling marble. She had offered Ilara one of her own silk robes and communicated with gentle hand gestures that she should rest, that they would talk in the morning. But sleep was impossible. Ilara stood by the massive window, looking down at the necklace of lights that was the city. She had survived. She had spoken her truth. The exhilaration was still there, a faint thrumming beneath her skin, but it was being steadily eroded by a tide of cold, hard reality. She had lost her job. She had made a powerful enemy even more furious with her. And she had accepted help from a man she barely knew, a billionaire whose motives were as opaque as the dark water of the river below. A soft knock on the door made her jump. It was Julian. He was holding 2 glasses and a bottle of what looked like very old, very expensive whiskey. He had shed his suit jacket and tie, and with his sleeves rolled up, he looked less like a corporate titan and more like a tired man at the end of a very long day. "I thought you might need this," he said, his voice low. "My mother has gone to bed. She left strict instructions that I was to make sure you felt safe." "I do," she said, though it was only partially true. The penthouse was a fortress, but her own mind was a battlefield. She accepted the glass he offered. The amber liquid smelled of peat and smoke. "You were incredibly brave tonight," he said, moving to stand beside her at the window. They stood in silence for a moment, the city lights reflected in their glasses. "I was terrified," she confessed. "I haven't spoken to him in over a year. I never wanted to see him again." "And yet you did more than just see him. You dismantled him." He took a sip of his whiskey. "He called you a liar, hysterical, unstable. Is that the story he told people?" Ilara wrapped her hands around her glass, the warmth a small comfort. "It was the story he told me. Over and over. He's very good at it. He chips away at you, piece by piece, until you start to believe it. He isolated me from my friends, my family, convinced me they were all against me. He told me I was lucky to have him, because no one else would put up with my issues. And the software? Sentinel?" Julian's voice was carefully neutral, but she could feel the intensity of his focus. This was it, the real reason she was here. He wasn't just being kind, he was gathering intelligence. She owed him the truth. "It was mine," she said simply. "All of it. I have a degree in computer science and mathematics. It's what I love. I started developing the initial framework in college. It was a theoretical project at first, something to keep my mind busy after Maya died, a way to create order out of chaos." She took a breath, the memories flooding back. "When I met Richard, he was charming, ambitious. He worked in finance. He saw the potential in what I was doing. He encouraged me, told me I was a genius. We got married, started the company together. I was the architect. I wrote every line of the foundational code. He was the salesman, the face of the company. It worked for a while." "What changed?" Julian asked quietly. "The money," she said, a bitter taste in her mouth. "As the company grew, he changed. Or maybe he just revealed who he'd been all along. He started taking credit for my work in meetings. At first it was small things. Then he started calling it his project. When I objected, he told me I was being sensitive, that I didn't understand business. He said no one would invest in a company whose genius programmer was a 20-something girl who preferred to stay home and write code." She stared out at the city, not really seeing it. "The more successful we became, the more controlling he got. He locked me out of the company financials. He told me I was paranoid for wanting to see the books. He'd gaslight me, twist my words, make me feel like I was going crazy. The final straw was when he filed the patent for the core algorithm with only his name on it. When I confronted him, he told me he'd have me committed. He said he'd tell everyone I was having a breakdown, that I was delusional and trying to steal his life's work. And the worst part was, I almost believed him." "So you left." "I ran," she corrected, "with nothing but a suitcase and what was left of my savings." He filed for divorce, claiming desertion and mental cruelty. His lawyers were sharks. They produced documents I'd supposedly signed, giving him full control of all intellectual property. They were forgeries, but I couldn't prove it. I had no money, no resources. He had everything. He even got a restraining order against me, claiming I was harassing him. He destroyed my reputation so thoroughly that I couldn't get a job in the tech industry anywhere. So I disappeared. I became a waitress. I became invisible. She finally took a sip of the whiskey. It burned a clean, hot path down her throat. She had spoken her entire ugly story aloud, and the world hadn't ended. She looked at Julian, expecting to see pity, or worse, disbelief. Instead, she saw a slow-burning anger in the depths of his eyes, an anger that was not directed at her. "He didn't just steal your work, Alara," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "He tried to steal your mind, your identity." He downed the rest of his whiskey in one swallow and set the glass down with a decisive click. "And we are going to take it all back." Alara stared at him, her heart pounding. "We?" "Yes, we," he said, turning to face her fully. The cool, detached billionaire was gone, replaced by a man filled with a chilling sense of purpose. "He tried to defraud my company. He insulted my mother. And he did this to you. This is no longer just your fight." For the first time in a very long time, Alara Hayes did not feel like a ghost. She felt like a storm that was about to break, and she was not alone. The sky was dark, and there was lightning on the horizon. The next few days passed in a surreal haze of strategy and cautious planning. The penthouse, initially a symbol of an alien world, began to feel like a command center. Julian was a force of nature, a whirlwind of quiet, focused energy. He brought in his personal legal team, a trio of razor-sharp lawyers who listened to Alara's story not with sympathy, but with a predatory gleam in their eyes. They spoke of tortious interference, intellectual property theft, and fraudulent inducement. Alara, accustomed to being dismissed, found herself being treated as the star witness. They grilled her for hours, demanding dates, specifics, names of early employees who might remember her contributions. The process was exhausting, but also strangely validating. These people believed her. For them, her story wasn't a tale of woe, it was a blueprint for a lawsuit. Julian, however, was playing a longer game. "A lawsuit will take years," he told her one evening, as they stood on the terrace, a cool breeze coming off the river. "Richard will bury us in motions and delays. By the time it's over, the technology will be obsolete, and he'll have moved on. We need to do more than just sue him. We need to dismantle his credibility. Publicly." "How?" Alara asked. The thought of another public confrontation made her stomach clench. "He built his reputation on a lie," Julian said, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of Cambridge. "So we expose the lie with an undeniable truth." "You said you built the Sentinel Code. Could you prove it? Is there something in the original architecture, a digital fingerprint that only the creator would know?" Alara's mind raced back through years of late nights and lines of code. She had been meticulous, obsessive. Richard, for all his bluster, was a salesman, not a programmer. He wouldn't have understood the deep intricacies of her work. "Yes," she said slowly, an idea taking shape. "There is. In the very first build, before Richard even had a name for the company, I embedded a failsafe, a sort of backdoor kill switch. It was for security in case of a catastrophic breach. It's tied to a private key encryption based on a sequence that only I would know." Julian turned to her, his eyes alight with interest. "What kind of sequence?" Alara felt a faint, sad smile touch her lips. "It's a line from a poem, the last one my sister Maya and I learned to sign together. Hope is the thing with feathers." A look of understanding, almost reverence, crossed Julian's face. He would never have found that. He would have built his entire empire on top of that foundation, never knowing it was there. "He wouldn't have even known to look," Alara confirmed. "He saw the code as a product. I saw it as a part of me. Can you still access it?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. "I think so. The company's servers must have a port open to the outside world for remote access. If I could get past their firewall—" "I can handle the firewall," Julian said simply, as if discussing the weather. "My own cybersecurity team is persuasive." A plan began to form, audacious and terrifyingly risky. It wasn't just about winning a lawsuit, it was about taking back what was hers, decisively and dramatically. During this time, Ilara also spent hours with Eleanor. The older woman was a quiet, grounding presence in the midst of the legal storm. They communicated for hours in ASL, and Ilara found herself opening up in a way she hadn't with anyone else. She told Eleanor about Maya, about her love for coding, about the quiet joy of creating something from nothing. Eleanor, in turn, shared stories of raising a brilliant, difficult son in a world that always wanted something from him. Julian doesn't trust easily, she signed one afternoon, as they sat in a sun-drenched corner of the penthouse library. He has built walls around himself as high as this building, but when he decides to let someone in, he is loyal to a fault. He is fighting for you, Ilara, not just because you were wronged, but because he sees something in you that he recognizes in himself, a creator, someone who builds rather than takes. The observation was so astute it left Ilara breathless. She was beginning to see past the billionaire facade herself. She saw the way Julian's focus narrowed when he was solving a problem, the genuine warmth in his interactions with his mother, the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. He wasn't a savior. He was a partner. The opportunity came a week later. Richard Vance, arrogant and unbowed, announced a major press conference. He would be unveiling Sentinel 2.0, a new version of the software, and announcing a massive new round of funding from international investors. He was doubling down, daring the world to challenge him. He's trying to get ahead of any rumors from the restaurant, Julian observed, reading the announcement on his tablet. He's creating an image of invincibility. If he secures this funding, any lawsuit we file will look like sour grapes from a jilted competitor. So we stop him, Ilara said, her voice firmer than she thought possible. The press conference is in 2 days at the Seaport World Trade Center, Julian said, his mind already working. The entire Boston tech and financial world will be there. It's the perfect stage. The night before the conference, Ilara sat before a laptop provided by Julian's team. The screen was a black void with a single blinking cursor. A secure, untraceable connection had been established to the servers of Vance Innovations. "Are you ready?" Julian asked, his voice a low murmur beside her. He wasn't crowding her, but his presence was a solid, reassuring weight in the room. Ilara took a deep breath and began to type. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a flurry of commands and queries. It was like coming home. The logic, the structure, the language of the code. It was as familiar to her as her own thoughts. She bypassed layers of security Richard's hired guns had added, her own old protocols like secret handshakes letting her through. And then she was in, the core of Sentinel, her creation. It was bloated now, layered with clumsy additions and patches, but underneath it all, she could see her own elegant, efficient architecture. She found the fail-safe, dormant and untouched, exactly where she had left it. She didn't activate it, not yet. Instead, she typed a new line of code, a simple command string linked to the kill switch. Then she logged out, leaving no trace she had ever been there. "It's done," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The trap is set." Julian placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm, grounding. "Tomorrow you get your life back, Ilara Hayes." She looked up at him, at the quiet intensity in his gray eyes, and for the first time, she truly believed it. Hope, she thought, was indeed the thing with feathers, and tomorrow she would finally let it fly. The conference hall was a cavern of blue light and hushed anticipation. Hundreds of journalists, investors, and tech industry players milled about, sipping sparkling water and speaking in low, reverent tones. On a massive screen behind the stage, the logo for Vance Innovations pulsed with confident energy. Ilara stood in the wings, hidden from view, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was wearing a simple, elegant, dark blue dress Julian had insisted on buying for her. It felt like a costume for a role she wasn't sure she could play. Beside her, Julian stood perfectly calm, a silent pillar of support. Eleanor was there too, seated in a special section near the front, a quiet observer in the unfolding drama. "You don't have to do this," Julian murmured, his gaze fixed on the stage. "We can still walk away." My lawyers can take it from here. No, Ilara said, surprising herself with her own resolve. He took my voice for 2 years. He's not going to speak for me today. On stage, Richard Vance strode to the podium to a wave of polite applause. He looked triumphant, his smile wide and predatory. He was in his element, a master of the universe about to unveil his latest conquest. Thank you, he began, his voice booming through the sound system. Today is a landmark day, not just for Vance Innovations, but for the future of predictive analytics. 2 years ago, I had a vision, a dream to create a tool that could see the future, that could protect assets, that could build a better, more secure financial world. I called that dream Sentinel. Ilara felt a wave of disgust. He was weaving the lie into a grand, heroic narrative. Richard continued his speech, full of buzzwords and self-congratulatory rhetoric. He spoke of his tireless nights, his singular vision, the genius of his design. Then he moved to the grand finale. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm proud to give you the first public demonstration of Sentinel 2.0. The main screen behind him came to life, displaying the software's sleek user interface. Data streams flowed, charts and graphs materialized, demonstrating its supposed power. The audience murmured in appreciation. As you can see, Richard said, gesturing to the screen with a flourish, the system is flawless, secure, impenetrable, the culmination of my life's work. That was the cue. Julian gave her a subtle nod. Ilara took a shaky breath and walked out from the wings, moving toward a secondary microphone that had been placed for the Q&A session. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as she approached. Richard, blinded by the stage lights, didn't see her at first. "Excuse me," Ilara said into the microphone. Her voice, amplified, filled the entire hall. It was steady, clear. Richard squinted, his smile faltering. "I'm sorry, we'll be taking questions after the demonstration." "This isn't a question," Ilara said, her eyes locking on his. She saw the moment he recognized her. The color drained from his face, his bravado instantly replaced by a flash of panic. "It's a correction." She turned slightly, addressing the captivated audience. "My name is Ilara Hayes, and I am the chief architect and original programmer of the Sentinel software." Gasps and frantic whispers erupted across the hall. Cameras turned from the stage to her. "This is absurd," Richard snapped, his voice tight with fury. "Security, remove this woman. She's a disturbed individual, a former employee with a grudge." "If I'm just a former employee," Ilara countered, her voice ringing with newfound authority, "then you should have no problem answering a simple technical question. Can you tell the audience about the Emerson failsafe embedded in the source code? The one tied to a 128-bit private key encryption?" Richard stared at her blankly. He had no idea what she was talking about. His technical knowledge was a thin veneer, and she had just smashed right through it. "I don't discuss proprietary security features in a public forum." "Of course you don't," Ilara said, a sad smile on her face. "Because you don't know it exists. You see, a true creator always builds in a backdoor, a way to protect their work, a signature. You called the software impenetrable. Let me show you how wrong you are." She pulled a small tablet from her clutch, a device Julian's team had synced to her laptop backstage. On its screen was a single large red button. Richard's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. "Don't you dare! This is corporate sabotage!" "It's not sabotage when you're taking back what's yours," Ilara said. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces, her gaze finally landing on Eleanor, who was watching her with an expression of fierce pride. Then she looked back at Richard, the man who had tried to erase her. "You stole my work, you stole my name, and you tried to steal my mind. But you forgot one thing." Her thumb hovered over the button on the tablet. "Hope is the thing with feathers," she whispered to herself. And then she pressed it. On the massive screen behind Richard, the complex display of Sentinel 2.0 vanished. The charts, the graphs, the flowing data, all of it was gone in an instant. It was replaced by a simple black screen. And then, in elegant white script, words began to appear, typed out letter by letter as if by an invisible hand. The Sentinel predictive analytics software is the sole intellectual property of its creator, Ilara M. Hayes, All rights reserved. Any unauthorized use is a violation of federal law. For inquiries, please contact the legal offices of Croft Enterprises. Below the text, a single image faded into view, a beautiful, hand-drawn sketch of a feather, a final, silent tribute to Maya. The hall erupted. Flashes strobed as photographers captured Richard's face, a mask of utter devastation and ruin. His empire had crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds, brought down not by a corporate takeover, but by a line of poetry and the woman he had tried to destroy. Ilara stood tall, the microphone in her hand, the tablet in the other. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was the architect, and she had just taken her world back. The weeks following the press conference were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media frenzy. Richard Vance's downfall was swift and brutal. His new investors pulled out immediately. His company imploded under the weight of lawsuits and federal investigations into fraud. The story of the brilliant female coder who reclaimed her stolen empire from her gaslighting ex-husband became a sensation. Ilara, who had once craved invisibility, found herself an unwilling but powerful symbol of resilience. Julian shielded her from the worst of it. His PR team managed the media, and his lawyers handled the depositions. But he made sure Ilara was at the center of every important decision. This was her victory, and he was determined that she would be the one to shape her future. The first step was the slow, methodical process of legally reclaiming Sentinel. Ilara, working alongside Julian's top engineers, meticulously documented her original code, providing irrefutable proof of her authorship. The kill switch was her smoking gun, but the elegant complexity of her initial programming was the body of evidence that buried Richard for good. Vance Innovations was dissolved, its assets frozen. What was left of the company, the intellectual property at its core, was transferred to a new corporation established in her name. She called it Maya Analytics. Rebuilding was not an overnight process. It was a painstaking effort of audits, legal filings, and rebranding. Ilara found herself in boardrooms, not as an invisible waitress, but as a CEO. At first, she was intimidated, haunted by Richard's voice telling her she didn't understand business. But Julian was there, not to speak for her, but to act as a mentor. He taught her about negotiation, about corporate structure, about leveraging power. And she learned quickly. The same logical, pattern-seeing mind that made her a brilliant coder made her a surprisingly astute businesswoman. Her relationship with Julian evolved slowly, naturally, away from the crucible of their shared battle. Their partnership, forged in strategy and secrets, softened into a deep, abiding friendship. They discovered a shared love for quiet evenings, complex puzzles, and long walks along the river. He made her laugh, a sound she had almost forgotten. She, in turn, seemed to be the only person who could penetrate his carefully constructed walls, who saw the man and not the myth. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 3 months after the conference, they were walking with Eleanor through the public garden. Eleanor, who now communicated with Ilara like a cherished daughter, was pointing out the swan boats, her face bright with joy. "She's happier than I've seen her in years," Julian said quietly, watching his mother. "You did that." "She did that for me too," Ilara said honestly. "She was the first person who really saw me." "I saw you," Julian corrected, his voice soft. He stopped walking and turned to her. The autumn sun lit the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "From the moment you started signing to her, I saw your grace, your intelligence, and then I saw your courage. It was breathtaking." Ilara's heart did a familiar little flutter. "I was just a waitress." "You were never just a waitress," he said, his voice firm. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It felt easy. "Right. You were a queen in exile waiting for the right moment to reclaim her kingdom." He paused, a rare vulnerability showing on his face. "The problem is, now that I've helped you reclaim it, I find I'm very reluctant to leave." Ilara smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. "Who said anything about you leaving?" His answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. It was a promise, not of a fairy tale ending, but of a real beginning, built on a foundation of respect, trust, and shared strength. Months later, Maya Analytics launched its first official product. It wasn't Sentinel. It was something new, something better. A platform designed not for cutthroat financial prediction, but to help nonprofits and research institutions manage and analyze data. It was technology with a conscience. At the launch event, held not in a sterile conference hall, but at a vibrant art gallery, Ilara stood at the podium. She was no longer hiding behind a microphone in the dark. She stood in the spotlight, confident and poised. Julian and Eleanor sat in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. For a long time, I believed that my voice had been taken from me, Ilara told the assembled crowd, her voice ringing with emotion. I learned that no one can take your voice. You can only give it away. Tonight, I am grateful for the chance to use mine, not just to build software, but to build a better world. This company is named for my sister, Maya. She taught me that the most powerful language isn't spoken but felt. It is the language of connection, of empathy, and above all, of hope. As applause filled the room, her gaze met Julian's. He didn't need to say a word. She saw everything she needed in his eyes. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer a victim. She was Ilara Hayes, the architect of her own life, and her future was a blank page, waiting for her to write the code.